All right, good evening. I want to thank everyone who is participating in our budget town hall here at the great Montgomery High School. And whether you're here in person or whether you are participating online, we thank you for the interest and involvement in our budget town hall. I've said this often, for a school district, developing a school district budget is much like developing your household budget. You have to think about what are the revenue coming in, and then you have to think about what are the priorities of expenses that you have to do, what are some things you would like to do, and every once in a while you might be able to do some things you'd love to do, but you have to take care of your priorities first. And so in the development of a school district budget, we believe in Montgomery ISD that it is best not only to do our budgeting situation every year as required by law, but to have a process that we can stand behind, a process that involves getting public involvement, getting public input from our employees and from our community. That helps us present the best budget possible to our board and the budget that really reflects the priorities of this amazing school district. So thank you for being here this evening. Thanks to those at home watching online. And thank you for all of the suggestions, ideas, and questions. All of them help us do a better job as staff truly presenting a great budget for our school district. If I have not had a chance to meet you in person or at any other event, I am Heath Morrison, the very proud superintendent of Montgomery ISD. We also have several board members in attendance tonight. We have Dr. Matt Fuller, our board president, and Mr. Mike Hopkins, member of the board. Thank you both for being in attendance. And so what I want to do is turn it over to Chris Lynn, our Assistant Superintendent of Finance Operations. And really what we want to do is to talk a little bit more specifically about the mechanics of what we have to do to create a budget, and then talk to you about what we're expecting in terms of revenue for next year, and then talk about some of the key commitments and priorities as we have already started to develop from other opportunities to get input, and then take questions, comments, suggestions, or ideas that you may have either here in person, or we also have people contributing online. So with that, I want to introduce my friend and colleague, Mr. Chris Lynn.
Thank you, Dr. Morrison. Good evening. As Dr. Morrison said, this evening we're going to talk not only about our budget and the process that we utilize to develop the 22-23 budget, but this is a unique year, one in which we are also out informing the public about a bond. And so those two intertwine this year, and we're going to explain the difference between MMO budget and INS budget. So as Dr. Morrison said, the first thing in MISD that we believe strongly is about the process. And adopting and developing a budget should be a process. It should not be a single event where the board comes together during the month of June and just approves it and goes on. And so our budget process this year actually started in December, where we were compiling information, salary information from the Texas Association of School Boards. So what you can see on the screen at this point, our budget, we have presented that compensation data to our Board of Trustees and showed how we compare to our regional counterparts. As the Assistant Superintendent of Finance and Operations, it's my job to develop, in partnership with Dr. Morrison, our preliminary revenue estimate, because before you can start building a budget, you need to kind of understand how much revenue you're going to anticipate coming in. Last month, members of the senior leadership team expressed campus enrollment projections and identified additional staffing needs that would come about by increased enrollment on our campuses. One of the big events in our budget development process will take place at the April 19th Board of Trustees meeting, and that is when they will actually approve the 22-23 compensation plan. And as we will discuss in more detail in just a minute, about 85% of our overall district budget is comprised of salaries and benefits. So by them adopting that compensation plan in April, it really does set our focus on that budget for 22-23. We will present a preliminary budget to the board in May, and then, as I said, they are required to adopt the formal budget prior to June 30th. It's always important. I'd just like to touch on a few Budget 101 topics. So actually in state law, the superintendent is the school district official that's charged with presenting or creating that annual budget. That budget must be prepared either by June 19th or by August 20th, depending on the district's fiscal year. Here in Montgomery ISD, we are a July 1 through June 30 fiscal year, so our budget must be prepared by June 19th, and it must be adopted by our Board of Trustees prior to June 30th. At the June meeting, the board will actually adopt 3 budgets. They will adopt the general fund, which we'll talk about here in a minute. They will adopt the child nutrition fund, and they will also adopt the debt service fund. And so we'll cover how the general fund and debt service fund interact with each other here in just a few minutes. Couple of facts or terms that you may see in the newspaper. Sometimes when you see a budget surplus, real simple terms, that means your revenues are in excess of your expenditures. That's a good thing. That's what we're always hoping for. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way, and we wind up with a budget deficit, meaning your expenditures are greater than your revenues. So we're always shooting for a budget surplus, at least a balanced budget. In Montgomery ISD, it's important to know where our revenue comes from, and so we get that revenue from 3 sources, the largest of which is from local sources. So property taxes, local revenue makes up about 85% of the revenue for Montgomery ISD, followed by about 13% from state sources and 2% federally. This is not how most districts across the state get their revenue sources. They get them from the same 3 places, but the percentages are vastly different here in Montgomery ISD. We have a lot of expenditures in our budget, but the key thing to remember is, as I said, 85% of our budget is salaries and benefits. So it's how many people we have, how much are we paying them, and the benefits that are associated for our employees. Then, once you start adding in professional services, such as utilities and some of those things that are required, you really start to see how little discretionary money the district actually has available to do some of these other things. Last year, being new administrators to the district, Dr. Morrison and I, as we were attempting to balance the budget, said, okay, if 85% of our district budget is people, then either we have too many people or we're paying them too much. And so we hired an outside company, the Texas Association of School Boards, to come in and do a staffing audit. Quickly, they showed us that we did not have too many people. Based on our data collecting and seeing how our salaries compared to our surrounding districts, we weren't paying them too much money. As Dr. Morrison will point out to you in just a little bit, we have some theories about why we don't have the funding that other school districts across the state of Texas have. But it was important to note that in both of those reports, we are staffed at the campus level appropriately compared to other surrounding districts, and our central office is significantly less than districts around the state. And we're not obviously trying to increase that number, but that's just important for the general public to know. So, as I said, this year we have a unique fiscal year in which we're talking about the budget, but we're also talking about the bond. And so we want to make sure that you understand how those 2 issues intertwine and interact with each other. So in case you haven't heard, the district is out there informing the community, and the board has called for a $326 million bond election focused on growth, facility upgrades, and career and technical education opportunities. There is all kinds of information on our website. We're not going to go into a lot of detail about that tonight, but please visit misd.org/bond, and you can find all of the information about our 2022 bond on there. We are rapidly approaching the deadline to register to vote. So if you are in the audience tonight, or if you are viewing this online and you are a member of this community and you are not registered to vote, The deadline to do so is April the 7th, so that deadline is rapidly approaching. Early voting starts April 25th and goes through May 3rd, and then Saturday, May 7th is actual election day. When you go to the polls to vote, you will see 3 propositions. These propositions do not show support for one project over another. Proposition B, which is the athletic complex, and Proposition C, which are technology devices, are required to be separate propositions by state law, okay? So Proposition A has everything except the athletic complex and the technology devices. It's important to know that when you go to vote, these 3 propositions are not in competition with each other, meaning you are not forced to only choose one. You can choose 1, you can choose 2, or you can choose all 3, okay? That choice is yours to make. In order to fund this bond, we are asking the community for a slight increase in the tax rate. We are asking for 0.7 of a cent, so less than 1 penny on the INS tax rate, and we'll talk about INS here in just a minute. The average home in Montgomery ISD is valued at $350,000, so that 0.7 of a cent equates to $22.75 per year on that average $350,000 home. So less than $2 a month would be the estimated financial impact on the average home in Montgomery. Any of our residents who are over the age of 65 and who have filed their homestead exemption would not be impacted by this bond referendum. Their taxes are frozen. Also on the ballot, it's important to know the state of Texas will be asking you, do you want to see an increase in your homestead exemption? The current homestead exemption is $25,000. The state is asking, do you want to see that go to $40,000? Previously, when this has been on the ballot in the state of Texas, it has been successful because people are always looking for more tax exemptions. Should that be successful, and should our bond be successful, the impact on that average $350,000 home is actually a decrease of $167.30 per year. So if both things are successful, that average home actually sees a decrease in the amount of taxes they pay each year. It's also important, we understand nobody likes paying additional taxes, but it's important to note that the MISD tax rate is at its lowest point, at its lowest rate back since 2005, 2006. And once again, all of this information is available on our website, misd.org/bond.
Thank you, Chris. And people get a little nervous when Chris puts that slide up there, Budget 101. There's no quiz, unless you want one, and then we can always do that. So funding sources. It's important, again, just like doing your household budget, how much is coming in before I can decide what are the priorities that I have to have, what are some things I'd like to do, and then what are some things I would love to do. And so, as Chris said, there is the MMO budget, a tax rate that goes to fund exactly what you would think it would fund, which is maintenance and operations. It what funds our people, the salaries, electricity, utilities, things that keep the schools cool when it's hot outside and warm when it's cold outside. And so that is the M&O rate. Then there is INS, interest and sinking, and this is really what pays for the capital needs. It's what pays for the bonds that we have already committed to, and if the bond were to pass, is what would pay for future bonds. Now, what's really important is, as we go out, and myself and Mr. Lynn do a lot of informational sessions about the bond, sometimes people will say, hey, if the bond passes, can you give your teachers a salary increase? And the answer is, we cannot. The bond and INS can only be used for the purposes that the bond passes. So it can only be used for those capital needs that we are going out to the community to ask for. But the M&O portion of our budget, the maintenance and operation, can be used for some capital needs. So if we need to replace a chiller, if we have to replace a roof, if we need to acquire new buses, Those can come out of the maintenance and operation budget, but obviously, as you can imagine, those things come at a pretty high price tag, and the more you're spending on your maintenance and operation budget on capital needs, the fewer are things available for the things that the M&O budget is intended for. And so, as we're looking at this year, this is really our initial assessment of where things stand. If you remember when Mr. Lynn said 85% of every school district's budget is their people, how many people and how much, and when we first came in and the district had been struggling to balance the budget and had also been struggling to get pay raises, again, the question was immediately, do we have too many people or are we paying them too much? And the data was very clear. We do not have too many people, and we're not at the time paying them too much. And so when you start to say, well, how can that be, and how can other districts do more with salary or have more staffing, this is a slide that shows the state average in Texas. There are over 1,000 school districts, so it compares the average from all across the state. On the right-hand side, you see Montgomery ISD, and the different color codes show the different sources of funding that Chris spoke to. The blue is federal, the red is local, and then the tan is state. And so you can see how different our funding sources are, and really there is a disparity between how we get funded and school districts across the state, and truly school districts that are very close proximity to us. People ask, well, how can that be? Why is that? A big portion of that is how many students you serve that come in the federal definition of poverty. The more students who are socioeconomically disadvantaged, the higher amount of federal funding that you get, and there are also triggers in state budgeting to also provide more for students who come to school with less. This gets really in the weeds, but there's kind of a magic number of 40%. If you're at 40% or higher as a school district, you receive a lot more federal and in some cases state funding. When you are below that number, even if you're close to that number, you can sometimes receive significantly less, especially federal. We are around 33%. So we're close to that 40, but still a ways off. So that accounts for some of this. There are other provisions in state formulas which are very complex. What I will tell you is, if you're looking at this saying, I need to talk to our state legislators about this, we have met with our state delegation. Dr. Fuller, myself, Mr. Lynn, some others, we asked to meet with our state delegation, and they were very willing to meet. They're very excited about the great things that are happening in our school district. We went through some of our questions and concerns about funding versus the state. There are particular provisions of things that kind of date all the way back to 2006 that happened before they were ever elected. They recognized it, and they were more than welcoming about saying there are some things that we need to look at, and we really appreciate their leadership and their commitment to doing that. But for right now, these are some of the challenges that we have got to work through. Just to show the federal portion of that, and when you're at 40% or higher around economically disadvantaged students that you serve, how that makes a difference. We received in the federal funding for COVID relief, you may have heard of it, called ESSER funds. The state of Texas received $17.3 billion. Out of that $17.3 billion, Montgomery ISD received $4 million. Now you might say, well, we're bigger than Willis, so if we got $4 million, Willis must have gotten $4 million, or a little less. Willis got $18 million. We are about 1/6 the size of Conroe, so you say multiply 6 times 4, they must have gotten 24. Conroe got $100 million. And so these just present some challenges. At the end of the day, I'm a big believer that it is incumbent upon us as school district leaders to do the very best we can with whatever we are given, state, federal, and local. So, our highest priority since coming on board at the direction of our board was to try to take care of our people. The data did not lie. As we looked at the data comparing our school district to our 9 regional competitors, those school districts that compete with us for teachers, administrators, assistants, bus drivers, food service workers, there was a clear disparity in salary. And so this was something that we needed to get on right away last year. And so the first thing we did was made our commitment to our board and this community and balance the budget. That was something that was very important to the board and very important to our community. We asked the board, and they passed in October a 2% pay increase for all of our employees. And then we came back last April around this time and presented a compensation plan to the board on behalf of our employees that gave our teachers an additional 5% and all other employees an additional 3%. We said at the time it was not enough to get us where we needed to be, but we did believe it would help us bridge the gap and make us much more competitive and make it so that salary would not be a driving force of us losing teachers and other valued employees to surrounding school districts. I am very proud the board passed this recommendation, and in fact these were some of the most generous raises given in this region of our state, and we were able to, in just 1 year, bridge that gap. But there's more work to be done. And so one of the things that we are trying to do in this competition for valued employees is to keep your great teachers and employees and retain and attract new ones. And so last month, the board, at our recommendation, used those ESSER funds, our last remaining, of which we got significantly less than other school districts, but we prioritized our employees, and the board passed retention bonuses for our employees. $1,000 for all employees who will be with us again next year, and then $1,500 for hard-to-staff, hard-to-fill positions. And so what would constitute that? Special education positions, world language, dual language, and bus drivers. Bus drivers are incredibly hard right now to find and to keep. And so, but all of our employees were benefited by this, and it is, as you might imagine, generated some excitement, which is exactly what we hoped it would do. It's really hard to read this, but this actually is Chris's sheet that starts to look at federal, state, and local sources of funding over the past several years, and it is his initial projections that have been shared with the board in their budget workshop last month about if we would expect any additional money. And really what is the driving force of additional revenue for our district in the absence of any changes to funding formulas is two things. Are we expecting more students next year? And then what is the percentage of daily attendance rate that we would expect? Texas is very unique. There are only 2 states that use what's called ADA. So it's not just how many students you have, but it's how often they come to school. And so the more students you get, the more money you get. The higher your attendance rate is, the more money you get. So it sounds complex, but really the mechanisms of it are pretty straightforward. So in looking at our projections for our budget for this upcoming year, we had to look at how many more students did we think we would have, and what is the attendance rate that we think we can hit. So we are projecting that we will have at least 300 more students next year than we did this year. We feel very strongly that that is a very, very conservative but responsible projection. Our rate of attendance has gone up enrollment has gone up every week since school started. Last year, before school started, we had not reached 9,000 students. Today, we are very close to 9,500 and enrolling more and more students every day. You can drive around, see all of the new growth, the new houses, and so we feel very confident that we can hit that 9,800 mark. We actually think we could probably project more, but if you project and get wrong, then there are some pretty challenging issues that happen in your budget, so we'd rather project low and have some additional money than project high and not have enough money for the commitments that we are making. The trickier part is attendance rate, because you might look up there and say, well, so you can see the more your attendance rate goes up, the more money you would project. And you might say, wow, 94% or even 94.5%, that seems really low. And for our school district and really for our state, those are rather low attendance rates. However, as you can imagine, the last 2.5 years, we have been telling families and students, if you're not feeling well, stay home. If you show any symptoms of COVID, stay home. And so attendance rates across the state are vastly different today than they were even 2 years ago. Many, many school districts are struggling to get above 70, 75% attendance rate. Some are struggling to get up to 80 or 90. Ours have hovered a little over 90 for most of this year. but we've been working with our principals, we've been having these conversations, and we do think that as we've been coming out of COVID and less students and staff have been diagnosed over the last several months, we are hoping to be able to get back to more normal rates of attendance. So we don't want to go back to where it was 2 years ago and predict 95 or 96%, because again, if we don't get it, then we're committing money that we may not get. So we'd rather predict a reasonable rate of attendance, a reasonable rate of enrollment, and if we predict, as we are going to, 9,800 students at 94.5% attendance rate, that brings us about $3.5 million more to our revenue. Additionally, the state of Texas does give some additional money if you are in the highest percentage of school districts experiencing enrollment growth, of which we qualified for this year as we did last year, because it's a recognition of how quickly our school district is growing. So we were allotted $700,000 of additional funding. That's good news. And so as we start this budget process, we are looking at about $4.2 million more next year than we currently have for this year. So what are our key priorities that we have already identified and start to socialize with our community to get input on? We did a lot with raises last year. We helped bridge the gap, but there is more work to do. There are still, especially amongst our teachers and other employee groups, the gap between what other school districts are paying and what we are paying is still enough that we are worried that with all other things being equal, we don't want our employees thinking they have to go up the road or down the road for the job that they love. They love teaching in Montgomery ISD. They love working in Montgomery ISD. So we want our salaries to be uber competitive. And so we are predicting, or we are going to be recommending to the board at least a 3% pay raise for all of our teachers. It says at least up there because when you look at a 3% raise for teachers, on average it's about $1,865. So we're still trying to see is there a way we can get that to be rounded up to $2,000. And we're very hopeful that we can do that by the time we present this to our board in April. 3% raise for all other employees. You see something called box adjustment, and you're like, what in the heck is that? It really is our pay grades, and it is a recognition that for a number of different reasons, individuals were hired over the years, and we're trying to make sure that there is equity between individuals who come in, and that if two individuals have the same job with the same years of experience, that they are all on the same pay rate. So there's some cleanup that we are having to do on that, so we're going to adjust those boxes. And then some positions have additional stipends. Teachers and employees who work additional hours, whether it's coaching sports, whether it's coaching fine arts, band directors, choir. We have an amazing choir program here at Montgomery High School, and so these individuals work a lot of additional hours. There are stipends that come with that, and so we want to make sure those are competitive too. So the total costs that we are predicting for these compensation increases would be a little over $2 million, about $2.37 million. Additionally, some other expenditures that we are kind of already on the hook for, or we are going to be recommending to the board for their consideration. Number one is, while more students come with additional revenue, that's the good news, more students come with some additional expenditures, which is what we have to budget for. That means more teachers to put in our schools, more paraeducators, more bus drivers, more of all the things that we need to do to serve an additional 300 plus students. Additionally, there are some other campus needs that we want to commit to. 504 is a huge need in our schools, and so a 504 coordinator for each of the middle schools, a 504 coordinator that would split between our two largest elementary schools are some additional things that we want to do for our campuses. Keeping our campuses clean and pristine and welcoming for learning is very important to us. We had some concerns with the previous cleaning company. We brought in a brand new cleaning company. While it is more expensive, we believe it is absolutely essential, so that is an additional cost that we have to account for. The PSAT is an exam that actually does a number of things. It helps qualify national merit scholars, and it also allows us to identify students who may be ready for advanced academic courses. So we want to provide that PSAT for all sophomores free of charge. And so that is an account. Reading Academy is a state initiative for all of our elementary teachers, and so we need to cover some costs for that mandate at $53,000. And then you have some things up there, special education, technology, and maintenance. We have a rising special education population. There's a lot of testing that needs to happen, services that these students desperately need. We need to do some additional funding in those areas. The good news is we believe we're going to get some additional federal funding to cover that, and there's also some contracted services, so if we have these employees, we don't need the contracted services. So we think most of that need around special education will be pretty even, but we'll need to apply some additional. We're still trying to determine what that is. CCMR coordinator, that's career, college, and military readiness. That is a big accountability point for all schools in Texas. It is about getting kids to walk across the stage and showing that they're ready for college credit. It is about having kids walk across the stage and getting a certificate to show that they're ready for work or the military. We have one coordinator between both schools, and she's amazing, but it's not enough, and so we want to add a coordinator so that we can have one coordinator at Lake Creek and one coordinator here at Montgomery High School. And then something I know our GT community has been clamoring for, but we want to have a GT coordinator and a GT program specialist. Again, there are some additional dollars coming from the state next year that must be used on GT, so this doesn't have a budget impact, but it is going to be a welcome addition to our school district. So these are some of the initial expenditures that we have already started to think about in our budget process. So just like your household, you sit down and you take out your sheet and you say how much is coming in, how much is going out. So predicting $4.2 million of additional revenue at $3.776 million of expenditures leaves us around $424,000 that we have not yet accounted for. Now that's a lot of money. However, as you know, as you've been pulling up to the gas pump, it is a lot more expensive to fill up your car than it was several months ago. Imagine all the buses that we run in Montgomery ISD every day. Those rates have continued to increase. Other utilities have continued to increase, and so most of that $424,000 will go towards increased projections of cost of utilities. So as you can see, it just doesn't leave a lot of money, but it does cover the things that we think are the highest priorities. What does that look like for our teachers? Because that's something our community truly cares about. They know how great our teachers are. We don't want to lose them. So just from where teachers were at the beginning of last year when we first started this work to where, if the board adopts that compensation proposal, they would be at the beginning of next year. You would see for a first-year teacher going from $51,000 to over $56,000. A fifth-year teacher going from $52,000 to over close to $58,000, and a 15-year teacher going from a little over $57,000 to a little over $63,000. So some significant pay grades, some significant pay increases, and we really believe that this absolutely bridges the gap and keeps our pay rates competitive with all of our surrounding school districts. And it's not just about the stipends or the salary increases. Some other things that we're doing, we've built in more time for our teachers for professional development and work time, something that's very important to them. Our employees have been clamoring for a couple of years now to have 2 paychecks a month rather than the 1 paycheck. We're going to do that for them next year. That does not mean they get twice as much money. It just means that their money is spread out over 2 paychecks. Pre-K discount for our staff members. Pre-K for anyone accessing that in our school district is about $600 a month. For our employees, we will take that down to $500 a month. We have been working all year with our employees on something called cultural respect. All organizations that are successful have strong cultures, and all strong cultures are built around mutual respect. And so we have an initiative that we're going to launch with our employees guiding the way, and so that will be part of what we're trying to accomplish next year. And then staffing ratios. There were a lot of different ways the school district used to staff schools. We have gotten together with our employees and our principals this year, and we are making sure that we have reasonable class sizes across all of our schools that are consistent across all of our schools. So if someone's saying, well, they like this principal better than that principal, so they give them more staffing, no, this is the staffing. Every school should have that, and if you don't, then you need to let us know because there's a problem. So staffing ratios that are equitable across our school district. So we threw a lot at you. but there's nothing that is not complicated about a school budget, although really the mechanics of it really are exactly like doing your household budget. What we would love to do now is to take any questions, any issues, any suggestions. What do you think we got right? What do you think we still need to focus on? And Jessica Grace in our communications department has a microphone. And you might say you've got a large voice, I do too, but we have an audience at home, and so it helps our folks online hear the questions and the responses if you speak into the microphone. So, Jessica, do you have your microphone? Oh, Justin has it, okay. Questions, comments, suggestions? Yes.
We just moved from a large school district up near Fort Worth, and so we've been through this whole bond package thing before and seen good results and okay results. So nothing really kind of out of the ordinary here. My only question is, I didn't realize how fast Montgomery's been growing.
Yeah.
And so just looking at the bond package, and so my kids, I have a couple of kids, well, I have kids in every campus we have here, except for, you know, that feeds into Lake Creek, I mean. And Lake Creek's already busting at the seams, and it's been open 3 years. And I heard you, sorry I came in late, but I heard you talk about projections of there's like 300 students that we're anticipating. If we're adding, how many other additional students will Lake Creek hold with this new phase? Is it like another 900?
Yes. So phase 2 of Lake Creek High School brings it up to the same capacity as Montgomery. That was always the plan. It was built when it was first designed in 2015. It was designed to hold 1,600. It would go to a capacity of 2,500, much the same as Montgomery High School.
Okay. So with, like, at the corner of Pine Lake and 105, they're building 105 or 900 approximate homes there, and other growth, like, while 300 may be, you say, a conservative estimate, what about in the upcoming years where we may have to renegotiate this bond package where to finance this other growth?
Yeah, so if you have attended any of our bond task force meetings or any of our town halls on bond, we actually spent some time talking about how the board considered a potential bond, how the bond task force looked at all the data. One of the most important pieces of data that they looked at was a demographic study that we commissioned last year. A group titled PASA came in. They looked at projected growth over the next 10 years. And we presented those findings to the board in the spring of last year, and it projected that, again, when they first started that work in the fall of last year going into early spring, we had not reached 9,000 students yet. Now we're at 9,500, and it predicted by 2030 that we would be at or close to or above 14,000 students. And it has it projected. It's on a website if anyone cares to see it. It not only projects those for the entire district, but at each campus. And the challenging thing is every campus is predicted to grow. Initially, the greatest surge will be at Lake Creek, Oak Hills, Keenan area, but all of our schools are predicted to grow. The scary part, and I think kind of speaks to what you're saying, is could the growth be even more and faster? And the answer is absolutely yes. Matter of fact, if you think about this, the demographic study was presented to the board about this time last year. And as Chris and I were working with the bond task force in the fall, we just kept on seeing houses popping up really quick, and then we were seeing houses where we didn't remember something in the demographic study. So we took the time to meet with 14 of the largest developers in this region, and we showed them the demographic study and said, hey, is there anywhere that you're slowing down? Is there anything that you were predicted to do that you're not doing now? And every one of these builders said, nope, everything in that demographic study we're still doing, but coming faster, more houses that are in there. And oh, by the way, here are some things that are not in your demographic study that are either already scheduled or are soon to be approved. And so, for example, you have Pine Lake Cove. If you go up 105 right across the marina, I think in our demographic study it was going to be 750 homes, now over 950 homes plus 250 multifamily homes. There are developments right across from Keenan where they've already cleared the land that are not in our demographic study that are going to be additional homes. There are some pretty robust projections of developments here in the Montgomery side. And so we'll have to adjust to all of those. That's the challenging part of this is, we've got the data, but we don't actually always know exactly what's going to be predicted, what's going to come faster. Sometimes these developers share that information with us, and sometimes they don't. No. Justin, anything from our online audience?
Yes, we did get a question about INS funds and bond funds and if they could be used for salaries.
Always one of the questions we get asked during this time. So as Dr. Morrison said during his part of the presentation, INS funds or bond money can only be used on those projects or those types of projects that we've identified in that bond literature. We cannot use bond money to go out and give our employees this pay raise that we're going to be recommending to the board at the April board meeting. So one clear distinction, and thanks for bringing that up, viewer, those bond funds cannot be used for additional pay raises or for additional staff that comes as a result of this growth. The other way, as Dr. Morrison said on one of our slides, the M&O money can be used for some of those capital expenditures. However, remember, 85% of our budget is people. And so the more money that we take from the M&O side to purchase chillers or to do those capital improvements means less money that we have available to either hire staff or to provide pay raises or to provide the monies necessary for our daily operations.
We did have another question come in. If the bond were not to pass, is rezoning a possibility?
I think that's a superintendent question right there.
Well, thanks. See, we want to coordinate this a little bit better. Boy, talk about things that superintendents and board members don't like to talk about, and that is rezoning or ever having to close schools. The challenge with rezoning is exactly as I was saying in the last question. All of our schools are experiencing growth. Every school in our district, from where they started at the beginning of this year to where they are now, have experienced rapid growth. That is going to continue. And so the challenge is when you look at the maximum capacity that our schools have versus the enrollment projections over the next several years, and all this is in the demographic study, you have schools that are either exceeded capacity, close to exceeding capacity, or very soon in the near future are probably going to be at max capacity. The only two schools that we could reasonably look at and say, well, maybe over the next several years to try to relieve the overcrowding at a Lake Creek or a Keenan is utilizing some capacity here at Montgomery High School and some capacity at Montgomery Elementary School. The challenge is that a lot of the projections, or a lot of the projects that were not in our demographic study are all on this side of town. And so we could rezone folks, and this always comes up because I always hear, is April Sound going to get rezoned from Lake Creek to Montgomery? First of all, I would never say that in a negative way. Lake Creek High School is an amazing high school. Montgomery High School is an amazing high school. So that is the nice thing as superintendent. It's not like, any rezoning would go from a great performing school to a poor performing school. We have two amazing high schools. But families come into a community, they buy houses in certain areas because they want to go to certain schools. So those are really the only two schools over the next several years that we could potentially do some rezoning to. Those are also, though, in the bond, the two schools that we have the most needs to come back and do some facility upgrades. So the two of the biggest recipients, if the bond were to pass for facility upgrades, are Montgomery and Montgomery High School, Montgomery Elementary School. And so the challenge is you're trying to rezone more kids into these schools as you're trying to go back and take care of some of those projects. So is rezoning an option? potentially at the high school level, potentially a little bit at the elementary, but there just isn't room. And really the challenge at the middle school, where in the bond, the committee really struggled with this because the demographic study said we really do need a third middle school. The challenge is with inflation, global supply chain issues, the cost of a brand new middle school today is $100 million. That's what it cost to build Lake Creek High School back in 2015. So the bond committee just did not feel like that could be a recommendation to go into this bond. And so while there's planning for a middle school 3 and there is the ability to purchase land for middle school 3, there is not a middle school 3 in this bond. The challenge is that you really don't have the capacity at Montgomery Junior High to alleviate the overcrowding at Oak Hills. So rezoning is an option a little bit at the high school, a little bit at the elementary school, but really with all of our campuses experiencing growth, not really the option that is probably the best.
I was just wondering about the land purchases for the $15 million. So is that land that is adjacent to schools now, or is that new property? How are y'all addressing the $15 million?
If we tell you that, then the land price just went up, right?
Yes, I bought my house some years ago for $8,000.
There you go. Obviously you want to purchase land where you think you need to alleviate overcrowding. And so this isn't like trying to give away secrets, but the land purchase for Elementary 7 has to alleviate overcrowding at Keenan and Stewart Creek. So if you think about where is their land and where is their accessible roads, you kind of get a sense of where we need to purchase some land for Elementary 7. The CTE Center and the Ag Science Center, if the bond were to pass, will serve both schools, Montgomery and Lake Creek High School. So we need to purchase land somewhere that is accessible and a pretty equal distance between the two campuses. So you can kind of start looking at that and saying, that's probably where the district is looking. Middle school 3 is the interesting one because, again, if we go with what's projected now, you would think it would probably be on the southern part of 105. However, if all of these developments start to come into play that are being discussed and in some cases already being agreed to, then it's entirely possible we might need middle school 3 on the western portion of our school district. So that's the one that probably we will not go right out if the bond were to be successful in purchase land, but the others are land purchases we need to do very, very quickly.
So most of them are adjacent to existing schools?
Not adjacent to, but not far off from proximity to some of our schools. So a lot of our schools simply don't have land adjacent available to purchase, or there's things that don't make it desirable land to build schools on for any number of different reasons that in the construction world people understand. So adjacent, no. Close to, yes. So we want to be super respectful of people's time. I'm going to hang out. Chris will hang out. So if you have a question and just would prefer to come up, we will certainly hang out. For our online audience, thank you. And you can always post questions to our Let's Talk application on our website. And again, we just really want to thank you for taking the time to come out and share some ideas and thoughts. Throughout the year, we've been taking people's suggestions, ideas about what should go into our budget. And I say this all the time. A lot of school districts have a fancy logo, and they have a brand new strategic plan, as we do, and they say that's our priorities. But in our school district, and I believe this is true everywhere, your priorities are really reflected in your budget. So our budget is aligned to our strategic plan, and the reason why salary compensation is the most important part of the budget that I'm preparing to go forward with the board is that the most important gift that we have to make a difference in the lives of kids every day are the people that are in front of them, with them, and serving them. So school district budgets are truly a reflection of our priorities. Thank you for taking time to be with us this evening. Please reach out with any other additional suggestions, ideas, or questions. That's what we're here for. It is a budget process, but it is a public school budget process, and we do it better when we are engaging our public. Thank you so much. Have a great evening and appreciate your time tonight.